You know, when we talk about something like a bank robbery, the crime scene is usually pretty obvious.
Right, yeah, like a broken vault or something.
Exactly. You've got a broken vault, shattered glass, maybe some grainy but, dramatic security footage. It's very binary.
It's a highly visible chain of events,
Yeah,
a physical breach.
right. The money was sitting there and now it's gone and you know exactly who to chase. But when millions of dollars of public funds go missing or are simply mismanaged at a vocational college, the crime scene isn't a broken vault.
No, definitely not.
It's a mountain of paperwork, a missing signature here,
Yeah.
an undocumented authorization there. So I really have to ask, when the dust finally settles on a massive financial failure, who actually goes down for it? Like, who carries the can?
That is the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
quite literally.
Yeah.
And it is a fascinating, incredibly complex web to untangle. Because public finance is actually designed to diffuse responsibility, even while the law tries its hardest to pinpoint it.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to figure out exactly who takes the ultimate fall when financial systems fail in a technical and vocational education and training institution, or TVET for short. And to answer this for you, we are exploring an incredible stack of sources you've shared with us. We have internal college financial policies detailing the daily grind, departmental mandates, a highly dramatic high court ruling from Mombasa, and some very recent parliamentary news reports.
It's a fantastic collection of documents, really, because it allows us to track the money from the very bottom of the institutional ladder all the way to the highest courts in the land.
Right.
But if we want to understand who ultimately faces the music, we can't start at the top.
Makes sense.
We have to start in the engine room. We need to look at the rigorous daily financial reporting duties, and that means looking very closely at the role of the finance officer.
Okay, let's get into the engine room then, because before we can talk about who takes the ultimate legal blame, we really do need to look at who is doing the daily heavy lifting with the money.
Yeah, the day-to-day reality.
Exactly. When we dig into the daily reality of a typical TVET, the internal guidelines map out a mandate for the finance officer that is just, it's staggering in its detail. This isn't just someone casually balancing a checkbook at the end of the week.
Oh, far from it.
Yeah.
I mean, the finance officer is the hands-on financial manager of the institution. And what's really striking in the documentation from places like Katyn Technical Training Institute is the sheer volume of their responsibilities compared to the size of their team.
Right, because they don't have an army of accountants.
No, they're often operating with a surprisingly lean staff. Sometimes it's just the officer and maybe 2 or 3 assistants.
Wow.
Yet they are expected to implement the entire institution's financial policies, control the accounting systems, manage daily risk, facilitate massive external audits, and ensure all tax obligations are met flawlessly.
Think about your own job for a second. Now imagine having to operate under the ethical framework demanded of these officers.
It's intense.
It is. The policies explicitly list core professional ethics they have to uphold daily. Things like professionalism, accountability, excellence, teamwork, and crucially, confidentiality. They are the absolute gatekeepers of the college's financial reality.
And that gatekeeping happens on a very granular invoice-by-invoice level. The internal creditors management policies we reviewed, like those from Capricorn TVET College, paint a vivid picture of what this daily grind actually looks like.
Yeah.
Every single payment leaving that institution must be heavily vetted.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's easy to say heavily vetted, but let's talk about the mechanics. How does a payment actually get approved? It's not just glancing at a bill and writing a check, is it?
Not at all. Prior to any payment being made, the finance officer or, their small team has to be satisfied of an exhaustive list of conditions. First, they have to ensure the claim is a proper, legally permissible charge against the college funds.
Okay.
Then they have to cross-reference their systems to ensure it hasn't already been paid.
Which sounds simple, but in a massive institution with thousands of moving parts, double billing is a huge operational risk.
It is a massive risk. I mean, vendors might send an invoice via email and then mail a hard copy a week later. If you aren't paying close attention, you pay both.
Oh man, yeah.
Then the finance officer must ensure the payment is authorized in terms of the delegation of authority framework.
Okay, let me jump in here, because delegation of authority framework sounds like some serious bureaucratic jargon. Can we break that down into plain English?
Sure, yeah. Think of it as the college's financial rulebook that dictates exactly whose signature is legally required for different amounts of money.
Right.
For example, a department head might be authorized to sign off on a $500 purchase of printer toner.
Makes sense.
But if the engineering department wants to buy $50,000 worth of new lathes and welding equipment, the rule book says the department head's signature isn't enough. It might require the deputy principal or the principal themselves. The finance officer has to check every single invoice against that specific rulebook.
And while they are doing that, they literally have to check the math too. The policies state they must verify that the computations on the invoice are actually correct.
Yes. They are calculating VAT, checking unit prices against the original contract, and ensuring the grand total adds up. But even if the math is perfect, the paperwork itself has to be flawless. The claim has to be supported by original documentation.
This is the matching principle, right?
Precisely. You need the original invoice from the supplier, you need the approved purchase order that the college generated internally, and most importantly, you need a signed delivery note or a goods received note.
So proof that the stuff actually arrived.
Exactly. The staff member who actually opened the boxes at the college has to physically sign a document stating that the supplier delivered the exact quantity and quality of goods promised. Only when all those pieces of paper perfectly align can the finance officer stamp that payment voucher as paid.
It makes me think of an air traffic controller.
That's a good analogy.
Right. The finance officer is sitting there in the tower, tracking every single invoice, every purchase order, every delivery note that lands on their desk, and they are trying to make sure nothing crashes into each other.
Yeah, and a crash in this scenario would be an unverified invoice colliding with a duplicate purchase order, resulting in public funds bleeding out to a fake vendor.
Exactly. But here is my pushback. If the finance officer is doing all of this meticulous daily checking, if they are the ones enforcing the delegation of authority and managing the daily risk, aren't they essentially in charge of the money?
It's a completely logical assumption. If you control the flow, you control the system, right?
Yeah.
But this is where we have to look at the strict external pressures imposed on the engine room.
Okay.
The finance officer doesn't operate in a vacuum. They are fighting against a ticking clock, specifically the 30-day rule.
I noticed that in the documentation. It's a legally mandated benchmark.
Yes. Unless there's a specific, unique contract stating otherwise, all payments due to bona fide creditors must be settled within 30 days from the receipt of an invoice.
Let's clarify bona fide creditors for a second.
Sure. A bona fide creditor is a legitimate, verified business that has actually delivered the goods or services as requested.
Right.
Not a phantom company, not a fraudulent invoice, a real supplier who did real work.
Right.
The government mandates this 30-day rule because if public institutions don't pay their bills on time, they can basically bankrupt the small and medium businesses that supply them.
Wow. Yeah, that has a real ripple effect.
Exactly. So the finance officer can't just sit on these invoices while they take their time verifying every single comma. They have to meticulously track the exact date an invoice physically entered the building versus the date the funds leave the college's bank account.
And the accounting system has to be able to instantly spit out the time period between those two dates.
Yep. They're constantly measuring their own efficiency against this 30-day legal benchmark.
But in the real world, things always fall behind. A lecturer forgets to sign a delivery note and goes on leave. A vendor forgets to include their tax clearance certificate. A purchase order gets lost on someone's desk. I mean, the 30-day rule is a great theory, but the reality is messy.
It is very messy. Which brings us to how the data escalates. When the system breaks down, when an invoice hits day 31 without being paid, the information has to move up the chain of command.
Okay.
And this introduces a specific and, frankly, highly stressful monthly reporting duty. The deputy principal of finance, or the finance officer, has to produce an exception report.
Just the name implies trouble. An exception report.
It really is a red flag document. They have to provide this to the accounting officer within 5 days of the month's end.
That's fast.
It's an incredibly tight turnaround. This report specifically isolates any invoices that were not paid within those 30 days. It details the number of delayed invoices, their financial value, and critically, the specific reasons why they weren't paid on time.
Wait, if I'm the finance officer and I'm already drowning in daily invoices, compiling a separate, detailed report just to explain to my boss why I'm behind seems like it would just put me further behind.
Right.
Does this actually work in practice? It feels like an administrative nightmare.
It is an administrative burden, without a doubt, but it serves a vital governance function.
How so?
Well, the finance officer deals with the routine, but the moment an invoice is delayed, it stops being a routine accounting issue and becomes a potential legal or operational risk. If you don't pay your internet provider, they shut off the campus Wi-Fi. If you don't pay your equipment suppliers, they stop delivering. Escalating this data forces the administration to see the bottlenecks in their own institution.
Ah, so it's about forcing visibility.
Exactly.
And while all this daily and monthly reporting is happening, the college is legally required to build an absolute fortress of paperwork. Reading the accounting records policies feels a bit like reading the security protocols for a nuclear bunker.
They really do take it to an extreme level.
They do. They physically require accounting records to be stored in a fire-resistant area or room. Access has to be strictly controlled by a designated custodian. You even need a logbook just to track who takes a document in or out of the room.
It's intense.
And the retention periods are nuts. Primary evidentiary records, those purchase orders, delivery notes, and invoices we talked about, must be kept for 5 years. Internal and external audit reports, 10 years. General ledgers and cash books, 15 years.
Let's take it a step further. Why go to all this trouble? Why build fireproof rooms and force a designated custodian to guard 15-year-old ledgers?
Because it's not just about paying bills in the present. They are building a defensive fortress for the future.
Exactly.
Audits don't happen in real time. They lag. An auditor or a judge might come knocking on the door 5 or 10 years down the line, asking about a specific payment made on a random Tuesday. The finance officer might have quit. The department head might have retired. That piece of paper in the fireproof room is the only thing standing between the institution and a massive corruption scandal.
And that leads us directly to the core question of our deep dive. Who is the fortress being built to protect? Who is receiving all these monthly exception reports? Who is the ultimate accounting officer in the eyes of the law?
Across all the documentation, from the internal financial policies at Capricorn to external requests for audit committees, the definition is uniform and unambiguous. The accounting officer is the college principal. They are the CEO of the institution.
The principal, not the finance officer, not the head of the audit committee. The principal.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, being the principal sounds great, you get the big office, you get to set the academic vision, you need to understand that in the eyes of the law, being the accounting officer is a terrifying level of personal responsibility.
It truly is.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To see just how terrifying, we have to look at that Kenyan High Court drama.
Yes. This is the case of Tom V., Director of Public Prosecutions and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Petition E021 of 2021, heard in the High Court at Mombasa.
This case perfectly illustrates the friction between the engine room and the captain's deck. Now, just for context for you listening, this specific case involves the CEO of a land commission, but the judge's ruling hinges entirely on the exact same legal definition of an accounting officer that applies to a TVET principal.
Correct. The legal principle is identical.
So, this CEO is arrested by the Anti-Corruption Commission. He's facing criminal charges over massive, allegedly fraudulent land compensation payments.
Let's look at his defense, because it's a very common human reaction. How did he try to avoid carrying the can?
He used what we can call the glorified clerk defense.
Right.
He basically goes to the high court and says, look, I am not a surveyor. I didn't personally identify these lands. I didn't evaluate their worth. I am just the CEO. I was presented with a highly technical report and the official minutes of a land acquisition and compensation committee.
Yeah.
That committee of experts approved the payment schedule. I just implemented their decision by signing the authorization. My role was purely administrative. I'm just a glorified clerk.
I get why he tried this. I mean, he's pointing out that the institution has a structure. He's arguing that because the technical staff, the specialized committees, and the finance officers did all the groundwork and handed him a completed stack of paperwork, he shouldn't be held personally criminally responsible for the outcome. He's relying on the system.
He's pointing firmly down the chain of command. But the High Court, under Judge J.M. Mativo, absolutely dismantled this argument.
They rejected it completely. And they did so by pointing directly to the foundational law, the Constitution, and the Public Finance Management Act, or PFMA. The judge noted that the Constitution deliberately elevates the position of an accounting officer to a very high pedestal. It is not, and can never be, a clerical role. It is a high office established specifically to safeguard public finance.
The judge cited Article 226, subsection 5 of the Constitution, and the wording here is the part that should keep every TVET principal awake at night. It says, if the holder of a public office directs or approves the use of public funds contrary to law or instructions, the person is liable for any loss arising from that use and shall make good the loss, whether the person remains the holder of the office or not.
Let's repeat that last part. Whether the person remains the holder of the office or not.
That is wild.
That is the constitutional hammer. You cannot retire out of this liability. You cannot resign and make it go away. The liability follows you into your private life.
And the judge was explicit about why the committee defense fails, right?
Yes. The ruling stated that there is no legislation that allows an accounting officer to cede their statutory ordained functions to a committee or any subordinate. If the government wanted technical committees to have the ultimate authority over public money, they would have written the law that way.
But they didn't.
No, they didn't. They put the crosshairs squarely on the accounting officer. Section 68 of the PFMA makes the accounting officer personally accountable to the National Assembly for ensuring resources are used lawfully.
Which means the CEO cannot claim to be a glorified clerk because the law expressly forbids them from delegating their statutory power. Even if a committee gives you a report, as the accounting officer, you are legally required to be the ultimate backstop. You have to verify that the committee acted lawfully before you sign the check.
Exactly.
So, to synthesize this for you listening, think about a restaurant. The finance officer is the head chef.
Okay, I like this.
They are in the kitchen, managing the chaos. They are checking the ingredients, making sure the math on the recipes is right, ensuring the delivery notes from the food suppliers perfectly match the purchase orders. They are doing the grueling daily grind. But the principal, the accounting officer, is the restaurant owner.
That's a great way to visualize the liability.
If a customer gets severe food poisoning, or if the restaurant is caught laundering money, the owner is the one getting sued or arrested. The owner cannot stand in front of a judge and say, hey, don't look at me, I'm just a glorified waiter, I just carried the plates. Blame the kitchen staff or the menu committee.
Right, the judge wouldn't buy that for a second.
The law says you own the restaurant, you hold the license, you carry the can.
The chef ensures the daily operations run smoothly, but the owner holds the ultimate legal and structural liability. But, we've been talking about constitutional theory in court rulings. What happens when this theory meets reality?
Yeah.
What happens when the meticulous daily reporting we discussed in the engine room actually fails and the accounting officer is held to the fire?
That brings us to our final set of sources, detailing a report from Education News about the Kenyan National Assembly's Public Investments Committee on Education and Governance. When theory meets reality, it looks like a very public parliamentary grilling.
This took place in April 2026.
Yeah.
The committee, led by MP Wanami Wamboka, hauled the principals of a slew of different TVET colleges before them. Places like Mbeere North, Runyenjes, Manyata.
And these principals weren't brought to Parliament to discuss curriculum development or student enrollment or high-level educational theory. They were brought in to answer for the exact granular financial mechanics we've been talking about.
The committee was examining Auditor General reports spanning 4 years. 4 years of accumulated audit queries. And what were the lawmakers specifically flagging? Unsupported expenditures and weaknesses in internal controls.
Let's unpack unsupported expenditures, because that links directly back to the fireproof rooms. An unsupported expenditure means the money left the college's bank account, but when the auditor went to the fireproof room 5 years later, the paperwork wasn't there.
Yep, the paper trail just vanished.
The 5-year retention rule failed. A payment was made without a signed delivery note. Or perhaps those 30-day exception reports were continually ignored by the administration until the vendors sued. The finance officer's engine room broke down, but it was the principals sitting in the hot seat before Parliament.
And the parliamentarians were not sympathetic. Member of Parliament Thaddeus Mambia explicitly told these accounting officers that simply receiving audit queries year after year is unacceptable. The committee demanded that the institutions demonstrate immediate corrective action and vastly improved financial discipline.
The committee went further, threatening to recommend possible sanctions against officials found culpable of financial impropriety. This proves that the High Court's ruling isn't just constitutional theory. The principle truly carries the can in the public eye. When the National Assembly wants answers about missing or mismanaged funds, they don't subpoena the finance officer. They subpoena the accounting officer.
The accountability is absolute. Now, the college administrators tried to defend their poor records. They cited real-world challenges like the delayed disbursement of funds from the central government and massive capacity gaps.
Essentially arguing that they didn't have the budget or the personnel to run the engine room properly.
Exactly.
Which is probably true. I mean, it's incredibly hard to maintain a flawless 30-day payment cycle and a fireproof archive when you are chronically underfunded.
It is a valid operational complaint, for sure. But as a legal defense, it fails. Just as we saw in the High Court case, operational challenges rarely absolve the accounting officer of their statutory duty. You cannot use a broken system as an excuse for authorizing unlawful payments.
So what does this all mean for you, whether you're working in public finance, leading a large institution, or just trying to understand how our public systems operate behind the scenes? It means that the financial health of a TVET institution relies on a very delicate, highly structured partnership.
On one side of that partnership, you had the finance officer. They execute the grueling, unglamorous daily grind. They enforce the delegation of authority, they track the 30-day payment cycles, they hunt down missing delivery notes, and they secure the paper trail in those physical archives. They are the guardians of the daily process.
But ultimately, the college principal is the accounting officer, and that is a role that carries immense constitutional weight, inescapable personal liability, and the very real risk of a public parliamentary grilling. As the High Court made abundantly clear, an accounting officer can never, ever claim to be just a glorified clerk. They own the outcomes, both good and bad.
Which leaves us with a critical question to consider. If the legal and financial stakes are so incredibly high and personal liability is permanent even after you retire or leave the job, how does this immense pressure change the way a TDET principal leads their institution?
That's a great point.
Does the constant fear of carrying the Utera shape can make them hyper-risk averse, stifling educational innovation because they are terrified of audit queries? Or does it force them to become better, more meticulous leaders, compelling them to build stronger, more transparent, and radically accountable colleges from the ground up?
When you realize that every missing dollar could literally follow you into retirement, it completely changes how you look at the job. Next time you read a headline about missing public funds, you'll know exactly who the law is looking for and why the paperwork in that fireproof room matters so much. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.